I would like to begin by acknowledging the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations and all traditional owners of the land that is Australia. We recognise the traditional owners' continuing connection to the land, waterways and community. We pay respect to elders past and present, and we acknowledge their stories, traditions and living cultures. As Jewish women, we respectfully honour and acknowledge First Nations women who, like our own matriarchs, are strong, brave, determined and resilient. Good evening. My name is Helen Lewin, and it is my privilege and pleasure as President of National Council of Jewish Women of Australia, Victoria, to welcome you all here tonight in our celebration of International Women's Day 2023, Embracing Equity. I want to welcome our special guest, Dr Niki Vincent, Commissioner for Gender Equality, past presidents and honourable life members of the National Council, and all other community organisation leaders that are here, and guests. I was going to do this on my phone, but I thought I felt more confident with paper. We are and have always been an organisation led by women, focused on finding ways to help women and girls live better, believe in themselves and achieve more than they thought was possible. We achieve this through our work in the Jewish and broader communities, empowering women at key points across the life cycle through our programs. Caring Mums, the Janet's Project, Connect, which is our service program. And throughout these programs, we provide women and girls with mentorship, training and support. Right after I finish speaking, you'll be able to watch a video that actually shows the amazing work that we do. In advancing the status of women, we are committed to promoting gender equality in the Victorian Jewish community, and this is demonstrated clearly by our Make Space for Her initiative. This initiative was started in 2009 and designed to tackle the issue of underrepresentation of women across Jewish communal leadership. We learned then that only 14% of Jewish community organisations had a gender balanced board. We knew from global research and best practice at the time that balanced board composition is vital to represent the communities and groups we seek to serve. Our objective was to ensure that women could enjoy the same access to and opportunities enjoyed by men in communal leadership, decision making, and on community panels and at events. The behaviours and aspirations of women and girls needed to be respected and valued as much as those of men. We've worked with a variety of Jewish community organisations to roll out the Gender Equality Pledge, calling on organisations to implement gender equality and provide the same opportunities to women as they do for men. We have over 55 organisations who've signed the pledge, and further now we've developed a directory of Jewish women that will feature talented women from our community. I'm not going to say any more about that because Karen will talk about that later. Make Space for Her is empowering women to take on leadership roles and make a meaningful impact in our community. By promoting gender diversity and inclusivity, this initiative is helping to create more equitable and just Jewish community for all. So let us take a moment to recognise the important work that this initiative and the dedicated individuals, namely the members of our advocacy committee, have made available. We hope that this event will inspire us all to continue to push for gender equality and to create a world where every woman can thrive and succeed. Okay, so thank you for joining us this evening, and I hope you're going to enjoy the video. After that, you're going to hear from Rebecca Forgas, who no doubt will be known to most of you, but for those who don't know her, Rebecca joined our board in 2021 and soon took over the Chair of Advocacy Committee from Ronnie Grace, leading the charge to roll out the Gender Equality Pledge Accountability Survey and revive the building of the online directory of Jewish women. Rebecca will be telling you about the Gender Equality Pledge, results of the survey, and please welcome Rebecca. first is the video.
For 99 years, the National Council of Women in Australia, Victoria, has been empowering women.
We play so many different roles as women. National Council and all the amazing things that they do really speaks to me.
National Council of Jewish Women creates a platform for women to find their voice, to be a voice, and to have a voice.
Gerald empowered me to believe in myself.
Tonight we learned about how to manage finance and money and stuff, so how to be money fit.
It's really rewarding seeing them become really confident and grow and be able to sort of turn into adults in front of my eyes is quite special.
By the end of the program, I really see increased confidence in the girls, really strong connections between each other as well as with their mentors, and a really strong sense of community. As a caring mum volunteer, our role really is to support and to empower women.
Caring moms just focus on you as a mom, and that's what I needed.
For many, their caring mum is their lifeline to community.
Caring mom also encourages you to be confident on yourself.
We are absolutely thrilled when we see the development of our mums as they begin to gain confidence and feel empowered.
By empowering women in our community, we see a flow-on effect. We see strong women being created. We see women having opportunities for leadership. We see women having opportunities to connect.
Our Connect program aims to empower mature age members of our community.
This club is like second home for us. We're making so many connections with people. Connect is a program that offers people a chance to get out of their houses and meet with others and feel safe and secure.
The beauty of having an advocacy subcommittee to support the work of the National Council is that in running our grassroots programs, we can raise awareness, we can go to our local MPs, we can close the gaps where other services might not be available. The Make Space for Her campaign is really the largest piece of work that our advocacy group has undertaken, aimed at encouraging greater gender equality in leadership positions within the community. The first piece of the Make Space for Her campaign was the Gender Equality Pledge, and the second piece of the campaign, which we're launching this International Women's Day, is our Women's Database. The database is really there to support all the work that we've done around the pledge and provide a searchable tool for organisations who are looking to actively increase the number of women in leadership positions and presenting at their events. The ultimate goal of the Advocacy Committee and of National Council of Jewish Women more generally is really around making sure there is space for women and girls to participate in all aspects of Jewish life, making sure they have the confidence to sit at a table and make decisions that will impact all of the community, and that goes a long way to promoting social cohesion.
All of our programs at National Council have been carefully designed to ensure that we provide support and empowerment opportunities for women at all stages of their lives.
From here, instead of running up, go check it, there's one there. That'll help. Is that on now? Yeah. Okay. I'm just waiting for the presentation.
So, might just start. My name is Rebecca Forgas, and as Ellie mentioned, I am a now former board member of National Council, and for a while chaired the Advocacy Committee, and was very privileged to have the role of really pushing over the line a couple of really major projects that the Advocacy Committee that you heard Anna talking about on the video had been working on for several years before I started. So. What I'm here to talk to you tonight about is the inaugural accountability report for the Gender Equality Pledge. So you heard in the video Anna talking about that pledge as an important component of the Make Space for Her campaign that was launched in 2019. Sivan, if you can go to the next slide. The Gender Equality Pledge, to those of you who aren't familiar or who don't remember what exactly it's about, was a pledge that we asked Jewish community organisations to sign up to commit themselves to greater gender equality in their organisations. And there were 4 specific actions that they committed themselves to. Sivan, if you can next slide. Or just click. The 4 of them are to embrace gender equality as a value in their organisation, to actively pursue a culture of respect for women, to annually review the number of women on their boards and at management level, and to actively work towards greater, more balanced representation of women in those roles, more equitable participation of women, and finally to adopt policies relating to gender equality in their organisations. The National Council of Jewish Women also took upon itself a number of reciprocal commitments in relation to the Gender Equality Pledge. Number 1, to actively go out and ask all Jewish community organisations to sign the Gender Equality Pledge, which we certainly do and have done and continue to do. Secondly was to publish a list of all of the organisations that sign the pledge, and you can find on the website of National Council a list which is kept up to date of all of the organisations who have signed that pledge. If any organisation that you're involved with isn't a signatory to the pledge, please take that up with them and ask them to become a signatory. The next one was to provide resources to organisations, which we do. We provide digital resources on our website and also convene occasional events for a community of practice of professionals working in Jewish community organisations to talk about how to implement gender equality and experiences that they've had where this has worked well. And then finally, and this is the one that we haven't quite gotten to yet at the point where, for a couple of years after the pledge was launched, and that was monitoring and reporting on the organisations that had implemented the Gender Equality Pledge. Now this is really important because a lot of organisations are very keen to say, yes, we support gender equality. We want that stamp of the Gender Equality Pledge on our website. We want to be able to say that. It's another thing to actually be held accountable to those commitments that they make under this pledge. Now, National Council can't be the watchdog of community organisations and go and make sure, but what we said we would do is we would implement an annual survey where we ask organisations to report on their fulfilment of those commitments that we would publish for members of the community to see. And then it is our hope that members of the community and stakeholders of those organisations hold those organisations that matter to them to account. If they're not fulfilling those commitments, and it's something that you think is important, we want you to go to those organisations and show them these are the results that we saw in the survey. This isn't good enough. We need to do that. So let me just show you. I'm going to focus on just a couple of the key results that we found in the survey. So just a snapshot of the survey was sent to 58 organisations, which was all of the organisations who were signatories to the pledge at the time. There were about 21 questions that covered all aspects of the pledge commitments. And we had a response from 37 organisations, which is 64% response rate, which is okay. We would have hoped for more, and we would hope the next time we do better. We certainly do hope that they're safe, but they do, because we did say to organisations, if you do not complete the survey 2 years in a row, then you will not be entitled to remain a signatory to the pledge. You must show good faith by participating in this survey that you mean business when you sign the Gender Equality Pledge. Okay, so a couple of the key results. I'm just going to focus on 2 key areas, which are number 1, reviewing the gender makeup of boards and management teams. This chart that I've just shown you here is the one that Kelly mentioned, which the Advocacy Committee back in 2019, when the campaign was launched, this was the research that they found about the number of women on boards in Jewish community organisations, just based on desktop research of looking at the what was published. Now, what I want to put up now, I have to emphasise we can't really compare, because we're not comparing, it's not the same sample, it's not the same organisations, it's fewer organisations, we don't know what overlap there was. But what we found in the survey, when we sent it out this year, Sivan, if you can just click on to this one, is that almost half of organisations have had a gender balance on their boards, okay, which we defined sort of broadly as 40 to 60%, just to allow for small sizes and for odd numbers, etc. None of the organisations, I will say that I suspect that the organisations who participated in the survey are the best organisations, so they're kind of self-selecting, but none of them are exclusively male. there's still 30% that have 60% or over male. And there is a small number as well that have majority female on their boards. Now, interestingly, when we look at the number of women at management level in organisations, noting that a lot of community organisations don't have any staff at all, much less management level staff, we see a very different situation. And what we see is that in organisations, very small organisations with fewer than 5 management level staff, perhaps unsurprisingly when you think about these organisations, that they are predominantly women working in them at all, but half of the organisations have, between 40 to 60%, and the rest have more than that of women at management levels. Now, what is perhaps a little bit surprising, and in a good way, is the numbers that we see in large organisations that have up to 15 or more management level staff. So we're talking about some of the schools in the community. Jewish Care is a signatory to the board. Some of the large professional organisations, that they also have, the smaller ones 42% average and 53% average women at management level in the largest organisations in our community, which is a really pleasing thing to see. Okay, finally, organisations have to make a commitment to working towards more equitable representation of women on their boards and at management level. We didn't set targets for organisations about what they needed to do. Okay, we recognise that there are different factors and conditions for different organisations, so we left it up to them to determine what equitable representation in their organisation looks like. And we asked the question in the survey, are you satisfied that you have equitable representation of women on your boards and management level in your organisation? And it's really interesting. You'll have to, the report is available online, and I think there are a few spare copies floating around tonight, to look at those organisations who have, say, 30% women, who go, I'm not sure if it's equitable. We also ask them, do you have plans, tangible plans, to increase the number of women on your board if you're not satisfied that it's currently equitable? And it's really interesting what organisations say there. Some of them quite openly say no. And they're the ones, if you are members, you must go to them and you must ask them to do better than that. So it's really interesting if you look closely at the results here and what organisations are saying they intend to do. Finally, I can't remember if there's anything else left on here. So finally, the last thing that we asked was, how important is it to you that your organisation signed the Gender Equality Pledge? And we were really thrilled to see that nearly 90% of organisations said it was very important or extremely important that their organisation signed the pledge. And again, I just want to emphasise, it's not good enough just to say it, they have to walk the talk. So really the point of this report is to empower people in our community who care about Jewish community organisations and to care about gender equality, to really empower them to have that voice and to go to those organisations and really demand that they do that and they live up to the commitments of the Gender Equality Pledge. So thanks everyone very much for listening.
Hi, I'd just like to introduce Karen Zelwa from our Advocacy Committee to talk about the very exciting launch of our Women's Directory.
Hi. Tonight I'm extremely honoured and excited to have the task of launching the NCJWA Vic's much awaited Women's Directory. And I love being in a room where I can use that acronym and everyone knows what it is. When our dedicated advocacy committee launched the Make Space for Her campaign in 2019, we had a very clear and targeted goal. And that was to increase the number of women on Jewish communal boards and to increase the number of female speakers at all events and panels. We knew that we had the will of the organisations when we received such an overwhelming uptake of signatories to our Gender Equality Pledge. But we also knew that these organisations needed our help to make the change happen. Each time we reached out to an organisation, and we did, to question their lack of female representation, the response was the same. We just couldn't find a female. All of us here know that there is a huge pool of talented women in our community. Women who are talented, articulate and passionate. Women who are experts in a huge variety of fields. But we also knew that we needed to partner with our organisations in helping them connect with these women. And this is where the idea of the Women's Directory was born. With the launch of the directory, no longer can organisations claim that they are unable to find suitable and willing females. In fact, before even launching, we've already onboarded more than 56 talented women, from Israel advocates to human rights lawyers, experts in finance, disability experts, women in politics, authors, Jewish educators, and so on. And that's just the beginning. So as we launch tonight, we ask of you, our partners, that you help us by signing up to the directory yourselves or finding other women to sign up, and by actually making sure that this resource is used and making sure that others are using it and directing them towards it. And that is the way that change will happen. So this directory is intended to be a living and breathing document that fills a much needed hole in our community. I hope you can feel our excitement about this directory as it's finally happening, and that it will help us reach our pursuit of increased female representation in our Jewish community. And on that note, I would like to introduce our powerhouse CEO, Lisa Ezekiel, who has helped us finally get this directory off the ground. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you all. I'm going to take my seat up here, so just be patient for a moment as I somehow get all the way up here. Okay, so we are very lucky this evening, just open the iPad. There we go. We are very lucky this evening to have Dr Niki Vincent with us. Niki was appointed Victoria's first Public Sector Gender Equality Commissioner in September 2020. She is responsible for overseeing the implementation of the Gender Equality Act 2020 and plays a key leadership role in promoting gender equality in Victorian community and workplaces. Niki is also a mother of 4 adult children, a full-time foster parent, has 2 adult stepchildren and 10 grandchildren. Wow. Can we all please welcome Niki up? Thank you. So we are very thrilled to have you here this evening. Thank you so much for joining us at what we feel is quite an auspicious occasion, launching these 2 amazing initiatives. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
I'm going to give you over here in a moment, but let's get straight into it if you're okay with that. Okay. So you have fought some pretty heavy battles of your own in your personal and your professional life in terms of inequity and discrimination. Would you mind sharing these experiences with us?
Sure. Hopefully you have worked out by now that I must have been a teenage mother, because I couldn't possibly have 10 grandchildren otherwise. Well, I was anyway. So I was a teenage mum, and I grew up in a poor area of South Australia. I was kicked out of home when I was 15 and got married when I was 18. And I had all 4 of my kids by the time I was 25, and I experienced a lot of discrimination. I looked pretty young as well, like I didn't even look 18 when I was 18. And so there was lots of discrimination I experienced, both as for being both a woman, but also a young woman, but also being a poor young woman. And my, capacity of parent was questioned. I was, derided by police officers on the street whilst trying to manage a twin pram at one stage and so forth. So lots of things like that. But I've had quite a varied career in my journey to get here. Do you want me to talk about that as well?
That would be great.
Yeah. Okay. So when I was, my kids were 0, 2, 4 and 6, I decided that I would go to university. And I went, I was, working very hard at university whilst also managing our family business and all the kids. And it wasn't until I got to the end of university when my then husband, the father of my 4 children, told me that he was having an affair with somebody, and that was it. It was over. During that few-month period, my house burned down, I had a major car accident, and then the final straw, as you can appreciate, was that the dishwasher broke down. That was it. I had a meltdown. But then suddenly I got this letter through saying that I was about to win the university's first ever university medal. And I kind of went, I wasn't even bothering to go to my graduation because things were so hard, and I kind of went, okay, after sort of feeling imposter syndrome and talking to it with my supervisor at university, him saying, you're not even close to anyone else, like you have to accept this as you earned this, you've got this. And then realised that all of this kind of chaos that I was in was possibly a turning point for me in my life, and I could have gone either way. And I thought, you know what, I didn't do anything to earn my intelligence. I happened to be born lucky, and maybe I should do something with that and do something good with that. So that took me on a very different journey, and I got lots of different jobs. I worked in academia, I've worked in public health, I've run lots of not-for-profit organisations. I've set organisations up from the start. I set up the Leaders Institute of South Australia, which is the same as the equivalent of Leadership Victoria here. And then from there, because I've done a lot around equality and diversity through that organisation, and particularly its major program, the Governor's Leadership Foundation program, I applied for the Equal Opportunity Commissioner role in South Australia, and to my absolute surprise, in fact, I even said, are you kidding, when they offered me the job, which wasn't very professional. And the person said, no, I'm not kidding. I got the job, and then from there, there were lots of challenges in that role, but amazing people that I was working with, and from there I was watching what was happening. I also happened to chair, I was nominated by my colleagues to chair the Australian Council of Human Rights Authorities, which is all of the state-based authorities, plus the federal Australian Human Rights Commission commissioners. I was chairing that body, and of course I knew a lot about what was going on around the rest of Australia, and I was watching what was happening in Victoria with this piece of legislation, and so excited about it. Didn't know that there was actually going to be a commissioner role attached to it, because it was later in the piece that came along, and then saw that there was, and went, I really want to be a part of that. It's so exciting. It's so innovative. It's it's an Australian first. It took the best of similar legislation from around the world and put it all together, and it really is world leading. And it's so exciting and such a privilege to be part of that.
Wow. Amazing. You keep the mic. You guys can hear me, yeah? Yeah. Excellent. My old teaching. So with all the challenges that come with being the Commissioner, can you tell us why you stay in the role?
Oh, it's a privilege to be in a role. I stay in it because every day I'm inspired by what we're doing here in Victoria. I think it's also, I think gender equality, the time has come, right? I mean, it's had its time lots of times, but I feel like we're at a precipice now, and at a tipping point now, and I feel like we're not going back, we're only going forward. So that inspires me. But also, if you're in a position where you feel like you can actually make a difference, and I have a team that are brilliant. But I also have these entities that report to me. There's 300 organisations that report to me under the legislation. And I expected a lot more pushback. I had a bit of trolling when it was kind of released that I got the job, and a few people on Sky News, a big picture of me to my surprise, on Sky News talking about what a waste of money I was. There was a video out with me with horns, and someone in America talking about what a waste of money I was. So I thought, this might be interesting, but it actually has been incredible in terms of the response from the organisations that report to me under the legislation. The response, we have 100% compliance. Not everyone's doing a perfect job, by far, but we do have so many people within those organisations that actually are so committed to this and know everything about what we're doing and follow us, in absolute detail. That really have faith in the legislation and the change it can bring about, which is incredibly inspiring. And we're also doing a lot of things as an organisation as well. We have a brilliant bunch of people that work at the Commission. We've got an internship program which brings in really brilliant young people, young men and women into the Commission to do particular pieces of research. and we work with a lot of organisations outside of our mandate, if you like, the public or the broad public sector, which is not just the public service, it's actually all of the 9 universities in Victoria and all of the 79 councils in Victoria, so it's much broader than the public service as such. So it's a fantastic job.
You're very lucky.
Yeah.
Let me know when you're finished. Can you share what a day in the life of being the Gender Equality Commissioner looks like?
It's hard to share a day because every day is so different, but I can sort of give you a scan of the week, if you like. There's pretty much a speaking engagement every day. So last year I did about 260 speeches. In March, I don't call it International Women's Day, it's International Women's Month for me. And in my first year in the role, I had 40 speeches in March, which was phenomenal. Thankfully, we were in lockdown, so they were all online. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to get myself to all those different places, and I think that would have totally added to the exhaustion of March. So there's a speech usually, there's always contact with an organisation, we call them defined entities that report under the legislation, and they are many and varied. So, but then there's a lot of work with other stakeholders, so a lot of your broader stakeholders, organisations like peak bodies and so forth, like your peak bodies for local government and other commissioners and so forth. Yesterday I met with the local Jobs First Commissioner in Victoria talking about the gender equality and what she and I can do together. I'm meeting with Respect Victoria's CEO tomorrow. I've got meetings with unions next week and other sort of broader interested parties and so forth. And then there's a lot of teamwork. We have a number of, we're like a startup, if you like, because we had to implement the legislation but set up the organisation to actually do that. So when I came on board, which is actually in October, I was appointed in September and I took up the role in October of 2020, Victoria was in lockdown. I was living in South Australia and had my foster daughter there who was finishing year 12, and I said, since you're all in lockdown, do you mind if I do it from Adelaide for a while my daughter finishes year 12? And then we came over, and I mean, the minister was fantastic. Like, you're the Gender Equality Commissioner, I can't understand what. When you're talking about your daughter. And so my daughter and I got in a car and came over here in January 2021. But the first obligations, the first audit data and the first gender equality action plans were mandated by the legislation to come to us in October of that year. So we had to employ all of the staff with a $3 million, 2.5 I think to $3 million IT project, which was the platform that organisations had to report into, and I had never done that before. I knew nothing about IT. It's the first experience I've had of employing someone and basically having to put 100% trust in them because I didn't know what they were talking about. And he, Simon, our IT manager, did an amazing job and is still on board trying to put in upgrades and keep going on this technology project, which I now feel I can actually talk about. But we also were in the middle of a pandemic, so we had a lot of organisations, 80 of the 300 plus organisations that report to me are health organisations, so that was really challenging as well. So yes, we pushed the obligations out, but we got there. But it was creative, a lot of creative stuff had to happen, which is different to what public servants are usually used to doing. They're not usually used to inventing things every day, and we literally were and still are inventing things every day. So we've done the first lot of obligations, which is the data audit, the gender equality action plans, and then the next obligation, which is in February next year, is for them to report on their progress. And they must make reasonable and material progress, or like as Rebecca was talking about, there are consequences. And I love that this legislation has teeth in that you can't just get away with doing a plan and saying and making a pledge. You actually have to show reasonable and material progress in every 2-year period. Otherwise I can issue compliance notices, I can right up to taking the organisation to VCAT and getting an order directing them to comply, which is stronger than any other equality legislation in Australia. I hope I'll never have to use those things, those powers, because every organisation will publish their data and publish their plans, and I can't tell you how quick the media was onto me once we published that data and made it public. You can go and have a look at any organisation that reports to me and see where they stand on gender equality, but I think that transparency and that media focus will keep organisations honest and working towards gender equality. But my team is still working out, well, what is progress reporting? Like, how do we do that? How do we define what is compliance and so forth? So it's a huge kind of thinking space for us at the moment.
And so, being the first and only woman or any person in your position, can you tell us why Victoria adopted this legislation, how it came to be, and what it actually means for Victorians who are maybe not working in the public sector?
Yeah, look, I think Victoria has led the way. It's progressive in a lot of social issues, on a lot of social issues. In 2015, we had the Royal Commission into Domestic and Family Violence, and one of the recommendations of that commission was that we look at gender equality legislation in Victoria. It was also a government commitment, an election commitment by the Labor government at the time, and so, you know, it was kind of set in train. The minister at the time was incredibly influential, and subsequent ministers have backed that up as well. There was an enormous community consultation process, went for a couple of years. And what was fascinating to me when I was thinking about applying for the role and I did my research and looking at the submissions to the legislation, what happened was you had, you know, reasonable legislation kind of out there for review, but the community consultations made it stronger. So actually put more into it and made it, you know, much tougher and more robust legislation, which is great because often it can get watered down after community consultation. And the other thing about it is that the legislation covers public sector organisations because they are the organisations that should be leading in Victoria in terms of gender equality. I think it's something every organisation should be doing, but we can't preach to other organisations unless government gets its own act in order. And so starting with the public sector, I think, is really important. And what we've got in this legislation is the opportunity to show that legislation with two key things, transparency and teeth, but also, you know, constant reporting, so every 2 years they report, has the potential, has the capacity to actually rocket fuel change that has been so slow for so long. And if we can then do it in the public sector, what does that mean for the private sector and so forth? And I have lots of conversations with the Workplace Gender Equality Agency and Mary Waldridge, who heads that up now, about how we work together to kind of, and her legislation has been strengthened in line with the Victorian legislation in lots of ways. There'll be more transparency, pay gaps will be published and so forth. Those are the sorts of things that I submitted to the legislative review because Victoria really is leading the way in terms of the quality of this legislation.
So I'm glad to hear that Victoria is leading the way, but I did hear a very jarring statistic from the World Economic Forum, and that is at the rate we're going, it's going to take 136 years for us to close the global gender gap. This is honestly quite terrifying. Where does Victoria stand in that space? Is it going to take us, please say it's not, 136 years to close the gender gap here in Victoria?
Not with this legislation, I think. I mean, this legislation gives me hope and an expectation in actual fact that it won't take that long. I mean, that's a global gender gap, and we know that, you know, gender equality has got a long way to go in many other countries. We're 43rd, I think, on the World Economic, the OECD countries. We're the 43rd, so not great at all, and we were much better years ago, so we've actually gone backwards. We haven't gone backwards, other countries have gone forwards more quickly. But I think that this this legislation will provide a case study for us to see the change, as I said. And so I think once we have the evidence that shows that with this kind of legislation it can really drive change, then that will be implemented elsewhere as well.
And so do you feel like we're making headway or making difference? And have you had any really significant moments where you're like, we're getting there, we're doing this?
Only in terms of attitude, really, I think. We've only just got our first lot of data in December 2021. And that's our baseline. So, you know, you have to watch this space for what happens the next lot of data and the next lot of data. And I've said to organisations that report to me for this first 4-year cycle, so there's data, action plan, progress reporting 2 years later, and then another 2 years later you have to progress report, do another comprehensive audit, upgrade your plan, etc. But this first year, first 4 years, I'm kind of, you know, not going to come down too hard. But the second, everyone will know what they're doing, they should know, and they should be geared up with the data, etc., and we will expect to see, you know, really real progress then. But yes, I think in terms of attitude, one of the little anecdotes that I often talk about is that when we got some data back that wasn't good enough, there were gaps, etc., we sent out notices to organisations to say, you haven't met your obligation here, these are the 7 key indicators, you have to give us data on each of those. And by the way, all this other stuff you could do better on, but you don't need to fix it if you don't want to, because it basically meets the legislation. And we were so surprised by how many organisations not only fixed up what they were legally obligated to fix up, but also fixed up the other stuff. The other thing was when we sent those notices out, my team were quite nervous because they were like, well, everyone's trying so hard and we don't want to, you know, send out notices and make the people who are trying to do this work in the organisations feel bad. But the feedback we got was fantastic. Because finally my boss took notice of the legislation when he got the notice and said we weren't up to scratch. And now we've got real action. So there are lots of people in the organisations that we're working with that are absolutely passionate about this and driving change. But it did make a lot of CEOs sit up and take notice as well. And I think they probably haven't quite relaxed yet either. So
good.
Yeah.
You're doing a good job then.
Exactly right.
So obviously your work is in the public centre and we're a community organisation and quite a tight-knit community at that. What sort of strides do you think we can be making? I mean, I understand that you had some organisations that weren't legislated to report to you, ring you up and say, can we please be accountable to you? So it's nice that our community as an organisation they're somewhat accountable to. What do you think it means for community and how it's going to filter down?
Look, I think what you're doing is fantastic, and the things that you've launched, you know, over the last few years, and the work that you're doing is amazing. We are looking at where to from here once we've kind of sorted out what we're doing with the public sector or the broad public sector. Looking at potentially, you know, is there an interest in voluntary reporting? And we've certainly, as you say, had organisations and construction companies actually, it's really interesting, saying can we report to you voluntarily? We don't have capacity for that at the moment, but that is something we'd love to do. And so, yeah, there is a lot of interest in that regard, and I think the sorts of initiatives that you're doing might actually drive more of that kind of, you know, interest in what can we do. On our website, everything that you have to do under the legislation and how you do it, so all of the guidance around that is freely available, so any organisation can go, even if they can't provide voluntary data to us at the moment, they can go in and actually use the materials that we've got to do a comprehensive audit, develop a gender equality action plan, and then report on their progress every 2 years. And the other thing they have to do is put a gender lens over everything, and that there's tools for doing that as well.
So can you talk a little bit about, because you use it's a term I hear, I've been listening to lots of your podcasts in preparation for this evening, that's something that you use a lot, the gender lens. Would you mind just unpacking that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so what each organisation that's covered by the legislation has to do under the Act is every program, policy or service that they develop or that comes up for review, they have to put a gender lens over that. So they have to look at how it might impact different genders differently. Now, when you think about that, you often think, well, I can't see how. Like, we're just making something that's kind of equal. It's just neutral. It's not one gender or the other. But what we know is that most of the world has been designed by men for men, and with men as a standard. And that's not malicious. It's usually men who were doing these jobs, men who were designing these things, and they just brought their own lens. And they didn't ever think about, it might actually be different for women or people who are non-binary, etc., etc. So what they're required to do is think about that, go out and consult about that, go and investigate that, and see whether there are any differences that would mean that they need to adjust their program so that it actually meets the needs of all genders instead of just one. And there are some fantastic examples of that in a book that I thoroughly recommend if you haven't read it already. It's called Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. It's my Bible, absolutely, and I love it. And the other book that I thoroughly recommend is The Authority Gap. And I forget the name of the woman, but you'll be able to look that up. Those two in companion give you all the evidence you need, really, for why we need a gender lens. But in Caroline Criado Perez's book, she gives a brilliant example about snow ploughing in a Swedish municipality. And you think it's snow ploughing, you think, well, how can that be gendered? But the snow ploughers and the engineers that designed the path for snow ploughing just basically went out and they did what they thought was right, and they snow ploughed the roads, cleared the roads, and then they started on the footpaths. But every year, so many women were slipping over and getting nasty injuries and clogging up the emergency department in hospitals, etc., etc. And when they realised that was because they were trying to get around with buggies or walking or bikes or on public transport, whereas the men were often just driving their cars to work, and they had snow chains and things like that anyway. So when they reversed it, they found that stopped all of the injuries, didn't create any more injuries from men on the roads, but it stopped so many of the injuries for women by just reversing it and snow ploughing footpaths first. And that's something that you wouldn't think was gendered. And so that is what is required. When you think about it, it's local councils. I mean, we don't have much snow here in Victoria, but it's local councils. Most of what they do, impacts community. It means that they are now going to have to think about, the use of their sporting facilities, who gets their grants in government. Even hospitals and other big infrastructure projects will need a gender lens. So that's what it's about.
So you just talked a little bit about things being equal, but the word equality and equity is something that I get asked a lot about. What's the difference? And so if you could maybe explain to us what the difference is and why they're not interchangeable terms.
There's lots of different ways that you can think about this, but a way that I hope is sort of reasonably simple is that we want equality of outcomes. But if we just give equality of opportunity, that won't necessarily create equality of outcomes, because people are starting from different starting points. So if you are a woman, you often are starting behind the eight ball in an organisation that's, just like an engineering, for example, or a male-dominated profession. It's much harder for you to just waltz in there. There are a lot of structural barriers to you working in such an environment. Similarly, a child that's born into a poor family, you can't just say, well, we'll just offer them equal opportunities. You actually probably have to put in more resources and more supports to help that child achieve their personal best, their potential. And the same it is with women, but particularly intersectional women, so women of colour, women who are women with a disability, Aboriginal women and so forth, older women, sometimes younger women, need extra resources and support, which we would call equity, to actually get them to equality of outcomes. So it's no good saying, and I hear this a lot, and in fact it came out in the statistics that our federal minister released in International Women's Day, that a lot of men think it's gone too far, think gender equality's gone too far. I mean, apart from the statistics, the rest of the statistics in that that press release that sort of said that, you know, the picture is otherwise. You know, we often get, what about men? Like, you know, you're disadvantaging men. It's not a zero-sum game. You know, gender equality will benefit men as well. There are a lot of stereotypes around men, what men should do and the way men should behave and what is men's work that disadvantage men as well. But we need to, if we're going to have equality of outcomes, have equity in that we need to support women and other disadvantaged groups to achieve that.
Yeah, I heard a great analogy that equality is everyone getting a pair of shoes and equity is getting when you get a pair of shoes that fits.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, there's a great little...
the soapbox.
Yeah, but I saw an extension of that actually. So there's the little soapbox with the three sort of boys, I guess, who've got a fence and they're trying to look at a soccer match or a footy match or something over a fence, and you know, the smallest one can't see over the fence, so you give them all boxes, and the smallest one still can't see over the fence. So they've got sort of equal boxes, but then you give them different size boxes. The smallest one gets a higher box and they can see over the fence, and then the next kind of picture is that they've taken away the fence and they've just put a chain link fence, and now everyone can see through and they don't need any support. And that's kind of taking away the structural barriers to equality, which is kind of ultimately where you want to get to.
We could sit here all night and listen to you. I think it's really important to end on a positive note, because obviously a lot of what we've spoken about tonight, yes, there's a lot of positivity, but there is an incredible amount of work to be done. Public sector, Jewish community, wider community. What makes you excited about the future for women?
Well, I think, as I've said, I'm excited about this legislation in Victoria, but I'm also excited about this sense of, you know, we're at a tipping point. I think Kate Jenkins has done an absolutely amazing job as Federal Sex Discrimination Commissioner. The changes, I mean, if you haven't, I mean, you probably, you know, you don't look at the detail of this like I do, but you go in and have a look at the legislative changes that are coming out of her work, respective work. There's been two big pieces of legislation going through, creating quite significant change. And her work in terms of setting the standard in Parliament and so forth, and that came out of the courage of other women who were prepared to speak out and so forth. I feel like, and then there's Liz Broderick, who I talked to the other day, who was a former Federal Sex Discrimination Commissioner, she's a UN Special Rapporteur for Gender Equality, and she's trying to create change around the world, and, you know, just so down to earth and fantastic, but doing incredible work. I feel like you know, there is a lot of hope for the future. There's a lot of hope for change, and I feel incredibly lucky to be part of that, to be, you know, actually holding a leading role in regards to what we're doing here in Victoria.
Fantastic, thank you so much. I think let's give We're going to open up to questions, because I'm sure a lot of you have got questions, even if it's specific to your own organisation, things that you could be doing better, ways that you can be engaging your own communities. Who would like to be the first one? Oh, Anne, thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you. Very exciting. I just want to know, you know how we've set up the equality, advocacy and equality in the National Council. I'm just wondering whether you think it's a good idea if we, in our surveys and assessment, use the same principles that you are actually required to assess under the Act, so that we're going to then, if you do extend beyond the public sector, then we would fit very comfortably within, and because we would be measuring what you would be measuring. So would you advocate that for us?
Oh, look, if you can, that would be fantastic. I think the more consistent data is, the better. And certainly we're working really closely with the Workplace Gender Equality Agency to get consistency across those two data sets so that we can build a comprehensive national profile. So if you can, and you can have a look at what we're doing, and you can download our data collection templates and so forth. But you can also contact my team and talk to them about it as well. Absolutely, but it is a lot of work, and organisations. Probably the most amount of pushback we got was how much work it was to do this. And we've got the weight of legislation behind saying, well, sorry, you just have to. You might get more pushback in that regard. We are doing a slightly lighter kind of data collection round for our progress reporting, which might be more suitable, but definitely we can have a conversation about that. Yeah.
Oh, there's one at the back. I know Marla's got a loud voice. She'll be fine.
Hi, yes. That's
Another
great,
teacher.
Thank you. What do you think is the most significant step an organisation can take to advance gender equality? If they're going to throw their weight behind one initiative, what should it be?
It depends what the starting point is. I would say if you've got sexual harassment, if sexual harassment is prevalent in your organisation, then that would be something that I think you should get rid of immediately. I, as Equal Opportunity Commissioner for South Australia, took complaints of sexual harassment. I got to see firsthand there. A small commission, I often conciliated the complaints myself with a member of my team, and because they were traumatic for us staff as well. I've seen the horrendous impact that sexual harassment can have, and I think it should be stomped out immediately. If that's already under control, I think pay gaps really crucial. It's incredibly unfair. It causes lifelong detriment to women who retire with so much less superannuation, etc., and impacts families of single parents and so forth. I think that's really important. I think those are my two kind of biggest things. I think we've got measures of composition, women in leadership. So although our sector is dominated by women, so 66% women, it's 43% women in leadership. So there's a huge gap there. And fixing that gap is really important. And to do that, we need things like greater flexibility, greater consideration of things like job sharing. I benefited from that myself when I was a mother coming out of university. My first job going into an academic role was job shared with somebody I met in the library. And we're best friends still 30 years later. That sort of innovation is required because we still don't have equality in parenting, do we? We still have women doing most of the parenting. So women have usually got one job that's underpaid and one job that's not paid at all, which makes it challenging for them to take on leadership positions unless they can work in those flexibly or in job shares and so forth. So those are kind of my big three, I suppose.
Oh, I love this.
This is great. Okay. Vic.
Thanks. I actually wanted to ask a question about that, about there's so many women who are so accomplished and achieving great things in their workplace, but at home, I'm shocked by the number of young women who I see with the really traditional gender roles in their families and bringing up kids. And I just wonder how you, I know it's out of scope of your role, but how do you think about that relationship between what happens in the workplace and the public sphere and what happens in the private sphere, and how one can impact the other?
It's a big driver of inequality, and what we want is for women to have choices about that and men to have choices about that, because men equally often don't feel they have a choice to take care of their kids, to stay home, etc. And because of the pay gap, because men generally earn more money, it actually entrenches that kind of stereotype relationship, because it's often the wiser choice from a financial perspective for the man to go back to work and the woman to stay home because she's earning less, even though she might be doing that same kind of job, because we've got a pay gap right from the moment women go into their first role after university, or into their first role full stop. So it's a kind of what I would call an adaptive or wicked problem. It's tangled up, and there's no kind of one way you can go, well, if we just fix that, you know, that would solve the problem. But we do have to tackle all of those different strands, and part of this does require us thinking about how we're stereotyping from before our children are even born, often thinking about whether we're having a boy or a girl, and all the things that we buy and do as a result of finding out what gender our child is, and then how we parent, and then even if we've sort of been the best kind of non-stereotyping parents, once they get to childcare or they get to school, then those things come down upon them like a ton of bricks. So it's not an easy problem to solve, but it's certainly what we want is for women to want to stay home with their children, not because they believe this is what they absolutely want to do, not because they believe they have to because they need to conform to stereotypes. And we want men to feel that as well.
I think, did Lottie have a question?
Some organisations, might be small organisations, where something like gender equality or gender equity is not top of the mind for the leadership team. How can we sort of put it at the forefront? Like, what's the compelling reasons for general managers, managing directors to be on board with this stuff? But even some of the stuff that's in this report that the National Council's done, how do we get that on the table?
Yeah. There's a lot of research that shows it is much better for business. So we know that better gender diversity, better diversity actually creates better outcomes. It's not just social and sociocultural outcomes, it's also better financial bottom lines. For male-dominated industries like mining and so forth, you also get better safety outcomes as well. So it's good for business. That research has been around for a very long time. It still doesn't seem to impact. So, and I know with small organisations that are just kind of trying to stay alive, you can understand how, you know, that longer term thinking perhaps doesn't come into the equation. Doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying, and I think, you know, we shouldn't expect the heavy lifting to be done by tiny organisations that are just trying to survive. The example should be set by government organisations, by the public sector, and by larger private sector organisations, which is why we've got our agency and the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, which is looking at organisations of 100 plus. Unfortunately though, there's a huge number of organisations in that sort of, you know, 2-person to 100-person, actually represents the majority of business in Australia. So it's not something we can ignore, but I'm hoping that the examples that we can provide by what we're doing and what Regia's doing will help those organisations to actually have a focus on it and not find it so difficult, challenging. Judy?
I was really interested to hear you say before about the imposter syndrome that you had, and yeah, I find it incredible how many bright, intelligent women say that, yet not as many men say that. No. So how do we overcome women having that imposter syndrome?
I don't think men admit it, but they do have it. Yeah.
But even that's something that they don't
admit. Yeah, absolutely. Men don't admit a lot of things are emotional, and that's to their detriment. That's why we've got high suicide rates among men, etc., etc., which is why I always say gender equality is good for everyone. Look, I think you often hear research that says women suffer more imposter syndrome, a lack of confidence, etc., and there's contradictory research in that regard. Even if you agree that women do lack confidence, the reason is because they usually don't experience the same opportunities in roles. You know, every time they go for a promotion, they're told you're not quite ready yet, whereas you see a guy kind of just getting the glass elevator up, you know, up to the top, as opposed to the glass ceiling that women often hit. So it's justifiable in some way, in some cases, because of the messages that they've had, perhaps even through their whole lives. I don't think it's as simple as that. I do think that men do experience it as well. They're just less likely to talk about it. That men are also more likely to negotiate their salaries than women, and often we try to fix women by putting them through a negotiation course, etc., etc. Actually, women negotiate the same amount as men, they're just less successful at it, and that's not because they're poor negotiators, it's because the stereotype is women who negotiate are aggressive and we don't like aggressive women. And so they're 25% less likely to get what it is that they're negotiating. And so women, I think, are often responding to the signals in the environment that this isn't a thing that women should be doing. And I think that rather than fixing women, we've probably got to fix the system as well. And we still do an awful lot of trying to fix women and fix them in a system that wasn't designed by them or for them, and it now needs, and that's not serving anyone really well, now needs to be different.
Leslie.
I just asked a question about the gender lens. You talk about applying a gender lens, but in reality, how easy is it for maybe a male-dominated organisation to actually apply a gender lens? I mean, I've heard, and I don't know if it's true, but up until recently, cars were crash tested using male dummies.
Yeah.
Up until about a year ago.
Yeah.
So how do you get a male organisation to think with a gender lens?
We have to have more women in there for a start. Or you have to talk to women, right? You know, I mean, that's, you know, it's not radical. I mean, I love the fact that we have legislation that says you have to do it, because I do think, you know, what you're describing is a sort of uphill battle to get people who have never considered gender and just think that you know, that is not an issue. And you're right, that crash test dummy example is...
Does everyone know what that is?
Women are 47% more likely to die in an accident than men.
Because of the way they test crashes and seatbelts is only designed and in the average height of men and builds of men. Yeah. So as a result of this, 47% of women are more likely to be injured in an accident because the seatbelt and the airbags weren't actually designed for women. They're designed for men when they're in an accident.
And often, even when they do have a female, it's putting passengers. Yeah. Of course, women don't drive. I mean, it's funny, but it's so serious when you think about the lives lost, and you know. And then when women get to hospital, they're often not given the same treatments because, you know, or the right treatments for them because the drugs have been tested on men's bodies, etc., etc. And you go on and on and on, and read Invisible Women. You'll just be. My partner used to say, I understand feminism, I understand why it's important, but why are you so angry? And then when he read Invisible Women, he's like, why aren't you angrier? Because it is just so full of stuff that you can't believe. So sorry, did I answer your question? Yeah, I mean, talk to women, get women involved in your organisation, and I think just, you know, give men copies of Invisible Women and piling them up.
Sally had a question.
Through your compliance outcomes, did you see any difference in results between organisations that were led by men as opposed to organisations that were led by women?
That is such a good question, and I can't tell you the answer yet. What we looked at, we had 67 million data points, and I've got, at the time I had a staff of, well, including me, 13 people. So we have a huge amount of data that we haven't yet analysed, and one of the things I'm dying to do, and because I don't have enough team members, I've actually got 23 now as of last week, including me, but I also studied statistics for years and did a PhD in modern statistics, and because my team didn't have time to analyse it, I'm like, just give me all the data and taking it home. And over January and December, I started to sort of wade through it to see if I could answer that. It wasn't in a format that I could get to that question. I am desperate to know. So watch this space. We will analyse it. We will put something out about it. We don't have brilliant kind of data at the moment. I'm thinking that the next progress report, where organisations will actually have their act together, and we're also bringing in regulation that says this is what you have to supply us. So in the last lot of data, they had to give us data on these things. We gave them a format to provide it, but if they didn't provide it in our format, but still provided data that met those obligations, we had to pass them. This time, well, you have to provide it in this particular format. So we'll have a lot better data and then we're able to do more complex analyses, but I am dying to find that out.
There was a question, yeah.
Yeah, so
We've had a lot of really insightful information being shared this evening and lots of other sort of conferences and seminars about feminism and equity and equality. But the biggest problem is I find that a lot of the time people around most people attending are women,
Yes.
female represented. How do you think, and this is going to obviously put you on the spot, like all of these questions have, but how do you feel like we can tackle that and, I guess, advertise it towards, I guess, inviting men more? Although obviously we are by saying it's equality, how else do you think we can practically change this, I guess, demographic?
I don't know the answer to that question. I wish I did. I mean, you do see more men now. There are men here tonight, which is fantastic. Thank you. It shouldn't be that women have to fix the problem, which is actually everyone's problem, not women's problem. But unfortunately, even in the organisations that report to me, it is women doing the data collection, it is women writing the plans and so forth. And, we've got a few really fantastic male advocates and allies, but, everywhere you look, it's women doing this work. I think that will change gradually over time, but apart from inviting men along, making a particular effort to do that, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe we could have some exciting act that, men would be interested in coming to see. I don't know. And I think it's often intimidating for men as well, being in a room like this. And, they don't feel safe often to have this conversation because they feel like they're going to say the wrong thing. And I get men talking to me all the time. Like a journalist, that interviewed me a few weeks ago, said, he's an investigative journalist, one of the best in the state, said to me, I'm actually really scared. Like, I feel like I might say the wrong thing, and, say something really dumb. And I said, don't worry, that happens all the time to me. But, I do think that it can be intimidating for men as well. I don't know how we can break down those barriers.
I think we'll be the last one. Two more. One and one, then we're done.
Thank you, and you're doing fantastic work. You referenced Kate Jenkins and the Respect at Work roadmap and the whole thing about positive duty of care for sexual harassment. And then we've got Sandra Parker from Fair Work Ombudsman that referenced your legislation in her recent annual report. I'm just wondering if there's some way we can interface all the fantastic work that's going on, albeit they're different platforms, to get better traction on very, very related issues.
Yeah, and in fact, Kate Jenkins' Respect at Work Council is doing that work as we speak. So what they recognise is that, you've got lots of different pathways, for sexual, if you're sexually harassed, and how do you know which one to take, what are your options, where to go and so forth. And so they are mapping all of that, the Gender Equality, the Respect at Work Council is mapping all of that out now to provide a sort of guidance for people in that situation. I feel like having different pieces of legislation kind of covering the same thing is okay. It's certainly better than not having it. And I think one of the really brilliant things that Kate Jenkins has achieved in terms of respect at work is actually getting sexual harassment to be seen as a works health and safety issue, which it wasn't before. I mean, it seems obvious, but no one thought of it that way. And I had a conversation with police when I was reviewing there in South Australia. They did a major review of sexual harassment and sex discrimination in SA Police at their investigation. And I was talking to one of the senior police officers after we did the review and we were rolling out the recommendations on auditing them, and he said, look, I just think people are getting a bit tired of gender equality message, so we're just going to back off for a little while because we're getting a bit of flack about it. And I said, so if it was a work health and safety issue, would you back off? And he said, no, of course not. And I said, well, it is actually a work health and safety issue, but he never thought of it like that. And nobody else thought of it like that either, or nobody much thought of it like that. that's what Kate's achieved, and so I'm glad we've now got it in, you know, fair work legislation, in safe work legislation, and also in gender, you know, Sex Discrimination Act as well, albeit confusing for people at the moment. Did that answer your question, or is it, yeah?
Yeah, I don't think it's confusing at all. I think
Oh,
it's an
great.
opportunity to do more. with what you
Absolutely.
just said.
Yeah.
What is that?
I agree. A lot. I do get told a lot that it's confusing. Like it's in all of these different places. But I'm so glad you would think that. That's fantastic. And we'll just do the last question.
So I just
Yeah.
wonder if there's anything we could do constitutionally for women's equality. You know, in terms of the Indigenous, there's the voice, which is great, and maybe we're also kind of there. We're not equal, but there's something we could do maybe constitutionally to have a bigger voice.
I don't know. I'm up for that discussion. Yeah.
I don't know.
I think it would be an uphill battle, but you know, I think the conversation would be excellent about it. That would certainly be an interesting stage.
I think we're going to leave it there. Let's give one more clap for Niki. We really do appreciate your insight and your wisdom. It's been invaluable, and we're really grateful that you were able to join us this evening. So thank you. Just a little something to say thank you. Thank you. It's really important for me to thank a lot of people very quickly that made it happen tonight. So I really like to first and foremost to thank the past and present members of our advocacy committee. Some people used to be on advocacy committee and have come here tonight, which is so wonderful to see. And the work that you do is really incredible. Obviously, Rebecca Forgas, thank you for putting together this fantastic report, which is really a resource, and I really would like to echo what Rebecca has said. If you see something that has upset you about an organisation you support financially or you're a member of, go to them. Use your voice and say, this is unacceptable, this is not an organisation that I'm willing to support unless there are changes made. So thank you. A really big thank you to the Australian Jewish funders and Catch a Fire. Without them, we wouldn't have a women's directory. So we're very grateful for them and that we could have this wonderful resource for the community at no cost to us. I'd like to thank Dan Monheit from Hard Hat for hosting us so generously, and Sivan and Naomi, my incredible staff, all of you for being here tonight, and thank you for helping on the door, etc. Most importantly, I'd like to thank all of you for turning up tonight and showing your commitment to change in our community. Without people here, there will be no change, so thank you all. I welcome you to stay, hang around. Niki will be here for a little bit longer, members of our advocacy committee. But thank you all, and happy International Women's Day month.